it was like super rainy and super cold. So I got on the bus and I sat at the back opposite this like older woman. But it basically kept going on, and this woman was really, really abusive. So I just ended up walking. I got off the bus in the next stop and I walked for like an hour home in the rain.
Hey everybody, it's Ben. So I know I said there might not be an episode this week, but surprise. I'm editing and scheduling this one ahead of time as I'm going to be on the road traveling to Grandma's house, actually, for a holiday visit at the same time that I would normally be editing the new episode. But I just didn't want to let another week get by without an episode. It's happened a couple times this season due to circumstances totally beyond anybody's control, like, say, a hurricane or a complete operating system disaster on my computer. This time, it's just the Thanksgiving holiday travel, so no major crisis, and I had some weekend time here to do this, so here we are with Season 2, Episode 12. Our guest this week is Adrienne, and our conversation was actually long overdue. We first touched base a pretty long time ago, and we finally got the time to talk today, as I speak, being Sunday, November 18th, 2018, and our trick was to make the time difference work. While I'm on the East Coast of the US, she's in Manchester, England, which, as an aside, is home to some of my favorite bands ever. The Fall, Stone Roses, Chameleons, and also home to a few other bands that are way higher up the totem pole. Adrienne lives there while working on her PhD, which we'll hear about, along with how Tourette has influenced her life. Real quick, I'm going to catch up on the listener mailbag next week. If you've emailed me, I've read it, and I truly appreciate it, and I will reply, I promise. And I also want to thank everyone who's come to the Tourette'S podcast discussion group on Facebook. Come on and join if you haven't already. It's where you can talk about this episode after you hear it, and post questions and thoughts and whatever's on your mind with regard to this podcast or TS in general. Tourette'S podcast discussion group on Facebook. Okay, zero further ado. Here's me and Adrienne.
Okay, so I'm Adrienne. I live in Manchester, in the northwest of the UK at the moment, but I'm from South Wales. So I've kind of currently started my PhD in medical microbiology. So I'm basically just a researcher in the university. And I'm researching bacterial infections in people with cystic fibrosis. And I'm just kind of, I'm looking at, the specifics of what I'm looking at is looking at the hormones in the human body and how they interact with the specific bacteria, and kind of figuring out a way that we could kind of stop that happening.
So what took you in the direction of researching cystic fibrosis?
So I kind of just had a wide interest in microbiology. That's kind of what I specialized in at uni, and then I did a master's in it. And then I saw this opening for a PhD, and I thought it was really interesting. It kind of had a lot of different aspects of science. I was interested in like biochemistry and microbiology. Talked with the supervisor and kind of just sounded really, really interesting. And I always wanted to do a PhD and eventually become a kind of career scientist. So I applied for it and ended up getting the position. So it's kind of where I am at the moment. It all kind of fell in, kind of not in a way I had planned it to, but it kind of worked out really well for me.
Nice. So where are you in terms of timeline and milestones and goals and graduations and all that?
So I started my PhD a month ago. So I have 3.5 years of basically a scholarship that gives me money to research. So
That's
I have
awesome.
to give in a thesis at the end of, I think I have a maximum of 4 years to submit my thesis. And then hopefully if it's new research, which it is, and if I contribute something to the scientific community, I will get my doctorate, which is really exciting.
That is awesome.
So I've just started my experiments, kind of just got going as fast as possible.
So everybody listening is gonna be wondering if you're gonna go in the direction of researching Tourette syndrome in some way, or I know that's at least crossed your mind, but is that something you're thinking about?
It did cross my mind at once, especially because you can get kind of tic syndrome from strep infections. That's a whole like kind of piece of research now. It's called PANDAS.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of strep infections as a kid, so it was kind of looked at to see if I did have PANDAS. But then my neurologist decided that I did actually have Tourette's syndrome, and it was strangely enough, not related to the millions of strep infections I had as a child. So there is kind of a lot of research which kind of crosses microbiology and Tourette's.
Yeah.
But I think, well, they might be by the time I graduate, they probably will be more research about it. So if that's kind of an option, I would like to go into that.
Nice.
But kind of microbiology is my specialty. So any kind of medical human microbiology is kind of what I want to go into.
With the diagnosis you mentioned, you might have said this, and forgive me if you did, but how old were you when you got diagnosed?
I was 7.
Okay, you were 7. That's roughly the age I was. Okay.
Yeah, I think my mum actually had Tourette's syndrome when she was younger. But she kind of grew out of it when I think when she hit kind of 17, 18. It kind of just subsided, and it was never as kind of like obvious as mine was. So she kind of noticed it when I was a child and took me to a doctor's. And it actually took about, I don't know, like 3 or 4 years for me to get actually diagnosed properly on paper with it, because they didn't really know a lot about it. I came from a kind of a small town in South Wales. Tourette's wasn't really a big thing. And there was a whole thing about they didn't want to label me. They didn't want to give me a diagnosis that kind of could potentially give me a label that people might not respond not like in a positive way to.
Yeah.
But in the end, I did get diagnosed because I did have kind of severe Tourette's when I was a child. So kind of did get that label.
Okay. So the point of the diagnosis at that point would be to kind of, I guess, start you down a path of some sort of therapy or medication or something like that to help you control it?
You would have thought so, but no. I think I saw like a child psychologist when I was 7 and got diagnosed. But then they didn't seem to think that treatment was a thing that they should have like explored at that time for reasons that I don't really understand. So I tried to get referred to a neurologist independently when I was in university. So I think I was about 19. So the next time I saw someone about my Tourette's was when I was 19 years old and had asked to be referred to one. And then I started on kind of therapies and medications for it and started my path quite late, I think, compared to a lot of people now.
Huh. So what kind of therapies did you try, and were they helpful at all, or?
So the first thing I tried was Diazepam, so just kind of a relaxant, which had no effect other than making me sleep for like hundreds of hours over a few months.
Yeah.
And then I tried tetrabenazine. So I think it depends what area in the world you're in. Tetrabenazine is either kind of the first thing you try or the last thing you try, depending on what doctor you see. So I ended up seeing someone who thought tetrabenazine was a good starting point. And that actually really, really helped for about 18 months. I think I maybe had like 2 or 3 tics a day for 18 months, which was like insanely low. Like it just completely disappeared in my eyes.
Wow. Okay.
But then I started getting completely kind of spontaneously started getting a side effect, which is called ocular gyration. So my eyes started rolling back in my head without me having any control over it. Which I think is actually quite common. And my sister, who is a pharmacist, kind of realized that the tetrabenazine was the thing that was causing it. So I came off it and I kind of tried to wean myself back on maybe like 2 years later, but the side effect just came back instantly. So my doctor kind of ruled that out forever now, I guess. And I've tried a few things after that. I tried risperidone, which is, I think, an antipsychotic. But I turned out to be allergic to that. So I had really violent, basically sickness after trying that for a few days.
Oh, gosh.
I've also tried botulinum injections, so basically Botox into the muscles that have the most severe tics. So I had that into my shoulder muscles. And that did help, I think, for a few weeks. But I think that at that time, there was only one doctor in the UK that thought it was kind of an option because it wasn't FDA approved, I think. Right. It was kind of on the doctor's own warrant whether he would give it or not. And there was only one doctor in the UK. And I lived a good 7 hours from him. So it kind of logistically didn't work. Every 8 or 9 weeks, I could travel 7 hours to get them. So I kind of I'm not actually on any medication for it now. I think I've tried everything that is kind of an option in the UK at least. So I think I've kind of moved past the medication story now.
Okay, gotcha. So, are you able to, without being on medication, and kind of looking at, I guess your catalog of tics before
Yeah.
medication, then you go through medication, and where you are now? How do those time periods compare? Are you doing okay with your tics, or do they just bother you less, or is there that just kind of acceptance and move on kind of thing, or where are you with
Yeah,
it?
I think acceptance is a big part of it, especially having tried a lot of different things for it and having pretty bad experiences with them.
Hmm.
I think acceptance is kind of still something I'm trying to work through. Sometimes
Yeah.
I'm fine with it and I'm just kind of like, oh, it's a part of me. I should just accept it and move on. And it doesn't really bother me as much as it could.
Yeah.
And then other days I have really bad days where my tics are really bad and I'm exhausted and I'm like, oh, why did this happen to me?
Yeah.
Why isn't there medication that will just sort it out? So I think there are different days, but I think the biggest part is just kind of trying to think that it could hinder my life more than it does, and I should just be thankful that I can still have a pretty successful and happy life with it.
What kind of tics are typical to you right now?
So I have a lot of arm tics at the moment. My arms kind of, I don't know, how would I kind of like lash out, I guess would be the best way to describe it, but not kind of violently, just kind of unexpectedly.
Okay, so it kind of whips out, or?
Yeah, exactly. I kind of, it sounds really horrible, but it's kind of funny if you look at it in a way, I guess. But I've kind of like hit myself in the face quite a lot unexpectedly.
Oh, wow.
But it's kind of, I had a lot of tics as a child that involved like hitting myself.
Yeah.
So I used to like kind of like hit myself in the back or whip my head back. So I've kind of, it sounds, I don't know, it doesn't sound very nice, but I am kind of used to the pain of tics. It's just kind of something that my family and my boyfriend and me kind of see the humor in it now, I guess, rather than like the negative. So I have those arm tics. I have kind of torso tics where I tense my torso really kind of hardly. So at the moment, I've got a dislocated rib from ticking so much.
Oh my God.
Which I think I've probably weakened it now. I've dislocated, I think, the same rib maybe 3 times in the last 5 years. Just because it's kind of like, you know, when you like tense your abdominal muscles. Yeah. It's kind of like I do that, but obviously maybe like 100, 200 times a day. And I think just like the sheer repetitive force of it, kind of one of my ribs doesn't agree with and gets pushed out of place a little bit.
Wow. I could be totally just sort of, you know, reaching out and looking for something that isn't exactly happening to me. But now that you say that, I've always had problems with the very base of my spine.
Okay.
And I do have sort of a torso tensioning type of tic that I do all the time. And usually it comes in conjunction with a weird breathing tic that I have where I just kind of, where I just hold my breath and I don't talk or anything like that. And I just tense my muscles, my stomach muscles quite a bit. And I have no idea if these things are connected. I mean, they might not be, but the spot on your back, is it lower or?
So mine is kind of my like left side, like lower rib cage. Okay. That's kind of where I like injure myself, I guess I can put it that way. But I think I've had that tic since I can remember, like the whole tensing my torso, I think has always been a constant tic. Wow. Since I was little.
Wow. So what's I mean, do you have to have surgery or anything, or is there a treatment for that?
No. So basically, here, I'm not sure what it's like in the US, but especially in the UK, even if you kind of fracture or break your rib now, they don't really do anything. They just let it heal by itself. So I think it's called subluxing a rib. It's kind of, it's not completely out of place, but it has moved enough so you can actually like feel quite a lot of pain. Yeah. So basically the treatment for that is like to kind of breathe deeply, to kind of expand your lungs and try to force your ribs slowly back into place. So I haven't even been to the doctors this time because I know they're not going to say that they can actually do anything. They're just going to say you have to wait for it to heal. So I'm kind of just doing that.
Wow. How do these tics compare to when you were, say, maybe around the time of diagnosis, if you remember that, or into your teenage years? Yeah, so I think I remember kind of most of how it's been. I remember it being really, really bad when I was little. Yeah. Kind of my vocal tics have always been kind of like grunts or indiscriminate noises. No complex words or swearing, like you can probably hear. So I've always had those, and they've kind of been a constant.
when I was little, like kind of 7 to maybe early puberty, my tics were kind of the same as they are now. So they were kind of bad when I first got diagnosed. And then when I kind of reached high school age, I don't remember really ticking that much when I was in high school. I can remember periods where they were really bad, but it was kind of like exam periods or like applying to university time. But other than like the super stressful periods, I don't really remember like my high school kind of friends noticing it.
Yeah.
But now I'm, am I 24? They're kind of back to the stage where they were really bad.
Yeah.
So I've kind of gone like through like a really major like cycle. But now I don't really hide them anymore. Like I work in a big communal office with maybe 30 people, and I tic kind of openly. And just kind of, I like told my supervisor when I started my PhD, oh look, I have Tourette's. It's a thing. Like it doesn't bother me. It doesn't have to bother you. You can talk about it if you want. You can ask questions, but or you can ignore it. But both of those things are fine with me.
Well, yeah.
So,
I mean, you would hope that, working in a scientific environment, that the acceptance level would be, it'd be pretty easy. But, some people who have more of these less specialized jobs, or maybe work in retail where they have to interact with the general public, then it kind of ends up being a different thing. Was it not until this point that you were open about it, or have you always been kind of open about it? Or
I think I've always tried to be open about it, but I think that's probably an overstatement. I've always thought I was being open about it, but now I look back, I was like, oh, actually, there are quite a lot of times where I was kind of hiding it. Like when I used to meet new people or meet new friends and things like that, I'd always kind of hide it for as long as I could. And then when they started to notice it, that would be when I kind of introduced them to the fact that I have it. But now, every time I meet someone, I kind of say, I either bring it up in like natural conversation, like, oh, when I went to the doctor's the other day for my Tourette's, or I'm on this new medication for my Tourette's. Or I just say, hey, look, I have Tourette's. It's a thing. You could ask about it if you want, but you don't have to. And then kind of move on with the topic that we were originally talking about. So I'm kind of like, I don't force it on people, but I make sure that they know now. Just so it used to be such like a horrible thing, having to meet someone new and having this thing weighing down on you that you knew that you had to talk about eventually because they would notice it. So now I just kind of get it out of the way, and it doesn't really bother me that much anymore telling people that I have it, which I think is nice.
Yeah. I mean, that is nice. I mean, are you finding that the reactions to it are way more tame than some people might fear? Or?
Yeah, definitely. They're just kind of like, okay, cool. And then they just move on and they just don't talk about it. It's just like not a thing. They just have no, like maybe not curiosity. They just have no desire to open it up as a topic, which is fine with me because they just think it's like telling someone that you have like a broken arm. Like they'd be like, oh, okay. And then they just carry on talking, which is really nice. And I definitely feel that the place where I work now, which is obviously everyone is a scientist of some sort, it's much more easy to tell people that are kind of open to new topics, kind of like scientists are curious people and very open people.
For sure.
And it was a lot. Yeah, it was a lot easier for me to tell my colleagues now than it was when I was bartending in a hotel.
Well, yeah, I'm sure a lot of them might even appreciate the fact that they sort of get to know it firsthand versus, something that they hear about or read about. And, it doesn't really have that direct line into, I mean, have you had negative encounters with Tourette's or?
I think I had the standard bullying as a child in kind of like primary school and secondary school for just being, I think everyone at that age picks on someone who might be a bit different. Yeah. I happened to be different in the fact that I had Tourette's. So I had a lot of like really bad bullying problems when I was younger. And then I kind of went to uni and realized that, when people are older, they don't really care. And I kind of got more open about it at uni, especially because I was studying science and a lot of the people that I now talk to are scientists. Yeah. But I've also had I always remember a story that when I was living in London doing my master's degree, I used to get the bus home and it was like super rainy and super cold. So I got on the bus and I sat at the back opposite this like older woman. And obviously I was ticking and this woman literally genuinely just was yelling that I was crazy and I needed to get off the bus and I couldn't be around people because I was obviously mental. And she was using all of these like really harsh terms and people on the bus were kind of like, sit down, she's fine. She's just cold. Or like they weren't saying that like I have Tourette's, but they were thinking of a reason that would kind of explain why I was ticking, which was nice. It kind of felt like they were standing up for me.
Oh, okay.
But it basically kept going on, and this woman was really, really abusive. So I just ended up walking. I got off the bus in the next stop, and I walked for like an hour home in the rain.
Oh my God.
Just because I couldn't, I was too, I think, frightened to get on another bus, just in case it happened again.
God.
It was easier just to face the weather.
What is it about the bus? It's like, I'm all about public transportation, but it seems like the bus is always the place where, I don't know if it's just the confined space that freaks people out, but
like, oh my God, there's something weird, like something I haven't seen before. I can't be in an enclosed space.
I don't know. It just seems like that's always the venue for when people really, really have a problem with people ticking.
Yeah, I think I genuinely have like a phobia of public transport. I get the train every day now to work because it takes me an hour and a half to commute to where my university is, because my boyfriend is also doing a PhD, but he's doing it in Manchester, where we live. Mm-hmm. And I'm doing mine in Liverpool, which is like a city maybe an hour away. So I have kind of a long commute on a train, and every day I'm like, oh, just get a seat in a corner and don't sit next to anyone and don't make eye contact with anyone, because if anyone notices that you're ticking, then it could start this whole thing. So just get through the train ride, and then you can tick after you've got off the train. So it's kind of like a ritual every morning that I kind of like calm myself down to get on the train, because I think it's easier to like suppress my tics than it is to deal with people's opinions.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, and that's definitely fair too. I mean, you know, in the ideal world, you know, there should be no problem at all, and ticking freely would be that's the dream for a lot of people. Ticking freely and no repercussions, no judgment or anything like that, and that's what I want. And I do tick freely when I'm, you know, walking down the street and all that. And people generally don't really notice much of me when I'm doing it. Yeah. But still, there are plenty of situations where even if I'm kind of fighting for an open, you know, ticking environment or that kind of thing, or not really kind of adopting the attitude where I don't care what people think, that sort of thing, I still find myself suppressing or at least thinking about it, especially what you said earlier too, you know, with when you're meeting somebody new for the first time, and especially if it's a figure of influence, a new manager at work or something like that. It's just, it's difficult to make that your first impression. And that really kills me. Yeah,
I totally agree. I kind of, every day I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take a bit more freely today, and I really do think to myself that I'm just gonna make my vocal tics, and if people ask, I'll just tell them, and I won't take any shit from anyone. But then I do find myself like kind of subconsciously suppressing them, and I'm like, what are you doing? You're supposed to be ticking freely. Don't suppress them. And it's kind of like an internal argument I have with myself every day. But I do feel a lot more like able to tick freely when I'm with people I know. So say if I'm on the bus with my boyfriend, I would tick a lot more than if I was on the bus alone, just because I know that if I have one person with me that can kind of help me fight that battle, if they need to, it makes me a lot more confident than being alone and having to kind of fight people myself.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I mean, having that support. And when you met him, did you have that same sort of reservation that like, oh God, I hope he doesn't notice me ticking, that sort of thing? Or
I think I did. So I met him when I was doing my master's degree. So I met him at like a new student mixer. So I already knew that he was probably going to be okay with it when I started like chatting to him. And then once I'd probably be talking to him for like 10 or 15 minutes, we went to get a drink, and I just kind of said it. I was just like, oh, just so you know, I have Tourette's. It's not a big deal. And then just stopped talking. And he was like, okay, cool. And then just carried on with the conversation we were having, which was really nice. And then later when we kind of had been dating for a little while longer, he started asking questions about it. Like, oh, well, what does it feel like when you tick? Or when did you get it? Or just kind of like the story about Tourette's. Because he'd never met anyone with it. And then it just kind of, I don't know, developed into like he knows exactly what it feels like, what it is like, and we've been living together now for a while. So, and his family are all kind of know that I have Tourette's, and I tick openly when I'm with his family as well as mine. So I'm kind of just getting like, I don't know, a bigger kind of group of people in which I can tick openly with now, which is kind of nice.
So did you, to explain it to him or to his family, did you cite any sort of creative analogies or anything like that just to explain like what it is to tick and what it is to kind of, you know, have this unavoidable urge? Yeah. So I think like most people, I kind of
it's really hard to describe, but if I do kind of try to describe it, I say that you know the feeling when you've got a sneeze coming on and you can kind of feel it building up.
Yeah.
But then I don't know if it's the same for everyone else, but I kind of can feel a tic coming on. But then until the tic happens, I'm kind of not sure what it's going to be.
Okay.
So it's like kind of part of my brain knows like my right arm needs to move. But the other part of my brain is like, oh, I can feel like I need to tic. I'm not really sure what's going to happen, so I'm just going to let it happen.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like I'm controlling it, but also not controlling it, which is kind of why I think I catch myself maybe in the nose quite a lot because I am not aware that that's the direction my arm is going to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it is kind of like a sneeze, and then you kind of get that relief, and you can suppress it for a while, but then it's kind of all you can think about, and it takes kind of more energy to suppress it than it does just to let it out.
Yeah.
For me, anyway. That's kind of how I think I would describe it.
Yeah, that I've done some thinking about that, and I don't typically have that ramping up feeling toward a tic. Sometimes it just happens, unless and I don't know if it's just I don't know how relative it is to this, but if it's one of the more embarrassing tics or more just a tic that I'm worried that other people are going to see and make a judgment about me with. Yeah. Those are the ones that I do kind of feel coming on, or at least I notice them coming on. Maybe there is some sort of back of my mind feeling for all of these, but if it is more of a quote unquote embarrassing tic, then that is one that I will kind of notice ahead of time. And that's, I think, when I was able to kind of pair other things with it to kind of mask it, like clearing my throat or something like that on top of another vocal tic.
Yeah, I do similar things.
What do you do to mask tics? Like whenever you feel you need to?
So if I have quite a lot of little vocal tics that aren't probably noticeable until you look for them. So maybe if someone notices I might kind of tic in quite a lot and they kind of catch my eye, I'll kind of clear my throat or pretend to cough or pretend to sneeze, pretend something was in my throat. And if I really need to tic, so I have some of my vocal tics when I'm on my own are quite loud. So they are kind of quite high decibel. So sometimes I would just like kind of go to the bathroom where I know no one would be there, or go to like, I don't know, outside for a little bit and kind of let them out. And then I feel a bit more like, oh, right, okay, I can start again now. And then in the next like 3 hours when I need to do it again, I can do it again. So I kind of sometimes just leave, go to the bathroom or go to the like back of the lab where no one is. Yeah. And just find somewhere that's kind of suitable for the more embarrassing tics, I guess.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, and sometimes even if you do want to tic openly or you have the opportunity to tic openly, it's good to just kind of have a place that's, yours, like to yourself, that you can just kind of let things out with. I have about a 10-minute walk from my office to my car with my day job. And, it's traffic noise and all that, and I can tic along the way. But when I get into my car, just that, whatever you want to call it, just I open the door, I get in my car, and then tics just start pouring out.
Yeah, I definitely get things like that. Yeah. So after I've got off the train in the morning, I've been actively trying to not tic for maybe 35 minutes. Yeah. So when I get off the train and I'm kind of walking up the road and everyone's in their own world, I tic kind of like not violently, but definitely with more space than I would in the train. Yeah. So my arm movements are kind of more exaggerated and my vocal tics are definitely louder. Just because one, I know that most people aren't paying attention. And two, if they are paying attention and do notice me doing like some weird extravagant tic, they will just walk past me and why would they stop me on the street? That's not going to happen. So I feel more like, I know I'm a bit in a big open space, but I do feel more alone when I'm walking on the street. So that's kind of when I get them out in the morning.
Well, so your mom, you said that she had tics in her youth. And I mean, is that something that, how did that come up, or how did you learn about that?
I think when I was little, say maybe like had just been diagnosed, 7, 8, I used to get really, really frustrated and upset that this had kind of like happened to me, I guess. And I used to ask my mum, like, why do I have this? What is it? When will it go away? Kind of thing. So then that kind of came up that, like I had it when I was little, like you, but mine went away. So there's a really good chance that yours will go away too. Yeah. Because I think my dad's sister also had it when she was younger, and hers also went away. So my auntie. So actually 2 members of my family had it. So I probably had a pretty high chance of getting it in the first place. So my mum was like, yeah, so it'll go away. You just have to get through it. And then probably when you're when you're like 20, you won't have it anymore. So I always grew up with this feeling like, oh, it's okay. Like when I go to like uni, it won't be here anymore.
Yeah.
And then obviously I was quite disappointed when I'm now 24 and it's kind of getting worse rather than better. But I kind of accepted the fact that it's not going to go away, and my mum was really lucky. But she did have quite a lot of she had quite a lot of OCD tics, which are apparently a thing, like ticking until it kind of feels right. I'm not sure if you get that or if other people get that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so she had kind of a lot of OCD tics. And I definitely noticed that more since she told me that's like maybe a few years ago. I think she told me that it was kind of OCD based. I've noticed myself kind of repeating a tic until it feels like I've completed it properly.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. I mean, I have not been diagnosed with OCD, and so I don't know if it's fair of me to kind of to put myself in that world, but I do have that sort of expectation. I don't even know what the right word for it is, but I do need that feeling of completion where I'll have a certain vocal tic and I'll have to really nail it and get it right and have sort of this very specific feeling in my throat before I can move on from it and say, okay, I did that one. But then a few minutes later it comes back and I have to prove myself again.
Do it all again.
Yeah. And what you're saying earlier too about the sort of the big maybe of, it might go away or there's a good chance it'll go away. Sometimes the popular belief that it is just a childhood disorder, I think does kind of fuel sometimes, even if parents were like, this might be Tourette syndrome or this may be Tourette syndrome, but I hear it goes away. Sometimes I think that sometimes undermines it kind of gets us away from diagnoses if parents are like, let's not put a label on them. But then at the same time, self-acceptance too, because if it's something that is going to, persist into adulthood, sometimes, I mean, you need to get in a position where it's like, okay, this is what I have, and maybe it's not going away. It might, but maybe it won't. And I'm going to figure out how to live with this, and I'm going to live proudly with it. And it's not going to be a problem for me. I mean, you had mentioned self-acceptance earlier. Did you kind of have a thought process like that of, they say it might go away, but what if it doesn't? And what am I going to do about it? How am I going to compose my life and all that? Did you kind of run through that in your head?
Yeah, I think I did. I think it took me a long, long time to actually accept that it wasn't going to go away. And I did just need to crack on with it. So especially with my mum and my auntie having it and then it going away, it did give me a lot of false hope that, it's like I do have it, but everyone in my family had it and then they lost it. So it'll be okay. I just need to wait it out. And I definitely did think like that when I was little. And then the more the older I got and kind of the realization that, I'm 19 now and it's getting quite bad. And then that's kind of when I referred myself to a GP to get referral to my neurologist. And I think that's kind of when the process began, that it might not go away. Let's kind of deal with it just in case it doesn't. But I think I say that I kind of, self-acceptance is great and I'm learning to live with it. But it did take me a good 5 or 6 years of kind of crying fits and resentment that I did have it, and just being really, really upset and depressed for quite a while because I didn't think it was fair that I have to deal with it. But now I definitely accept that I have it now, and I definitely wear it proudly. I would rather be known as that cool scientist girl with Tourette's,
right? Yeah.
Than try to hide it. So, I think saying that I did learn to accept it is probably an understatement. It took me a very long time, and I did kind of resent myself for a long time. But I definitely feel like I've got past that stage now and that I wear it proudly, which I'm quite proud of, I guess.
So outside of the family, are there other people with Tourette syndrome that you've interacted with, or do you ever talk to anybody else who has Tourette syndrome currently? Or
so when I was in London, I was going through kind of a bad patch with it, and I went to a support group for people with TS. And I got there, and it took me ages to find. And I got there, and finally, I was like, "Are you the guys that do the TS support group?" And just kind of broke down in tears when I finally got there, because that was the first time I'd ever spoken to someone else with Tourette's, and that was like 18 months ago, maybe. I got there, and then I went. It was really nice, and it was really good to see people just kind of living their life with Tourette's.
Yeah.
But I didn't kind of feel like I fit in with the people that went there. So it was a lot of parents with children with TS there. And it was a lot of parents who had just gone there because they had a suspicion that their child had it, and they wanted to talk to people who did have it to basically self-diagnose, I guess, their child, which I totally get. But also the reason I went there was to get support from kind of people in my own demographic.
Yeah.
And I really feel that wasn't there. It was mostly just parents with children, or parents with children that might have Tourette's. So I kind of feel like a lot of people wanted to talk to me, but they wanted to talk to me to find out if I knew anyone with Tourette's that had it gone away, or like, how bad is it and how do you cope with it? It wasn't kind of for my support. It was kind of me supporting people with children with Tourette's.
Okay. Yeah.
So it was, I wouldn't say it was a negative experience, but it kind of wasn't what I was looking for with going.
So did you persist? I mean, did you get into online communities or that sort of thing to find people that were more your peer group? Or
I don't think I didn't actually. I was going through like kind of a bad spell with my depression at that time. So I kind of went there looking for kind of like a saving grace. And I didn't find it. And then I thought, oh, right, okay, there's no one like me. I'll just stop looking.
Right,
and I kind of just forgot about the other people in the world with Tourette's that I might have like kind of been able to form a connection with. And then I think that was probably about 18 months ago, 2 years ago. And I think the next thing that I had was when I went to get a new tattoo. And I went to a new guy up in Manchester where I live now. And obviously I have quite a few tattoos. And obviously I have to tell the person that I have Tourette's because it's not going to be helpful for them if I'm moving. So I let him know, and I was like, just let you know, I have Tourette's. It's a thing. I can control it. So when you're tattooing, it's fine. I can not move. And he just turned around and said, oh yeah, that's cool. My uncle has Tourette's and I tattoo him all the time. So like, we're totally good. And I was like, oh, okay. That was really surprising to hear. And then we talked about it, and we just had like a nice, like I was there for like 7 hours. We just like chatted about like Tourette's and his uncle, and it was really nice.
Oh, that's
great. I think after that, it kind of got me thinking that, there are other people out there like me. I should try to at least like find them, I guess. And I obviously have a Twitter page in which I use for my kind of scientific academic life. So I just kind of searched like #Tourette's, #Tourette. And then obviously I stumbled over your page and your podcast, and I think that was probably the next thing that I found to do with other people with Tourette's.
Yeah, Twitter is exactly how I connected with a lot of people on here, especially before the first season when I was trying to get interviews going, and but also just to kind of make that connection, because I mean, like you said, I couldn't find anybody sort of in my demographic or in my age group, or a lot of the resources I was finding online were dedicated to children and to parents, and that's important, and that's totally needed. But I definitely saw or experienced a void until I did exactly what you did, which is #Tourette and #Tourette's and #TS and #Tourette syndrome, and I have that that tweet deck thing where you can create these columns with different hashtags. I made one for every like variation I could on Tourette's, Tourette syndrome, and all that. Just every phrasing I could think of that might lead me to people who have it. And of course, that also led me to a lot of people who make jokes out of it. And I had a cussing fit at the office today. I hate my boss. #Tourette's or something like that. And it's clearly not somebody who's coming from the Tourette community. They're just using that as the joke. But through all those weeds, there were so many people I found. Adults, even people who were, in their 50s and 60s, and just a big enough globe where it's like, okay, there's a lot of people I can talk to here. And it really put it in perspective for me when it came to sort of the pre-internet era of people who really didn't have that that ease, and I use the word ease in quotes, but just that quick ability to, all right, let me see who's out there who's like me. I personally, I think, need to talk to more people kind of from that era, just to learn how they kind of dealt with it. And, you know, if they didn't have anybody around them to talk to who experienced the same things, how did they do it? And I mean, this is, I know I'm rambling here, but that's, I think, one of the next chapters of this podcast for me is just kind of learning more from them. And I am in touch with some of them. So I really look forward to getting those stories out there. I mean, did your mom say anything about that? Or, and I guess it was more for her youth or in her youth, but did she ever mention that kind of thing, not having people to talk to about it? Or
no, actually, she doesn't really talk about like a lot of her kind of TS childhood, I guess. Mm-hmm. Whether she doesn't think, I don't know whether compared to mine, I think it was quite mild. Yeah. So I think she didn't want to make a big deal out of hers because mine was kind of medically more severe. Yeah. Or whether it didn't affect us because it was kind of so mild, it didn't affect her. I don't know. So she hasn't really kind of discussed a lot of that with me, which is, come to think of it, quite interesting, I guess. But I think it was a lot milder than mine was now, and especially when I was a kid. So and she had kind of a big family. She had 2 brothers and kind of a lot of cousins and different things like that. So I think she probably had a big support group. And I'm actually not sure whether she was ever kind of officially diagnosed with it. I don't know if it's on her medical records or to a doctor, if her parents actually took her to a doctor. So she was born in the 60s. So whether it was even a thing, especially in this like little coal mining village where she came from, maybe it wasn't even kind of a thing they would even know how to put a label on back then. So
a lot of having Tourette syndrome has to do with kind of getting to know yourself and kind of what it means for you and what you can do with it. But then also the other aspect is, you know, making sure the world around you understands. And I mean, if there's one thing that you think's missing, or a way of describing to the world what it's like to live with Tourette syndrome, or advice for parents, or just anything, this is sort of a big open blank at the end. But I mean, what comes to mind with that?
So I would say probably to parents of children with PS, or to parents of children that might have Tourette's, it's not a big deal. Like, it doesn't matter how mild it is or how severe it is. You can still have a super amazing life with it. Like I definitely like cherish my life and think I'm really, really lucky that I have everything I do, even in spite of how horrible I think my Tourette's might have been when I was a kid and even now. And I guess to people who don't have Tourette's, or the kind of general public, if you do see someone doing something weird or acting a bit strange or ticking on the train or the bus, either ask them about it or don't stare at them. Like, I wouldn't mind if all of the people that used to stare at me on the bus would just come and say, hey, are you okay? Do you want to, are you okay? Do you need to talk? Or can you explain it? I would be really, really happy if someone had asked me about it rather than kind of abuse me about it.
Yeah.
So if you want to ask about it, if you're curious, if it's something you haven't seen before, you should ask. But if you don't want to ask, then just stop staring. It doesn't help.
Thanks so much for listening. I really dug that one, and it brings me to a question. I didn't say it during the interview, but I could really relate to the tattoo part, about having to be totally still while a tattoo is being applied to your skin. I do have a few tattoos. I mean, nothing too dramatic or conversational or anything, but getting a tattoo hurts. I mean, it's uncomfortable, and sometimes that's the deal breaker for some people. You know, like I want a tattoo, but I don't like the fact that it hurts. Well, what bugged me more was having to sit still when I knew I needed to tic. And the ridiculous thing is that all of my tattoos are on my upper arms, like my biceps. And one of my longest running tics is tensing those arm muscles. I do that in a lot of places, my stomach as well, but tensing my arms is just a long running tic that I've had. And getting tattooed on my upper arms meant that I couldn't do that tic if the process was going to be worthwhile at all. And what I recall doing, though I guess I never thought about it this way until now, is that I was concentrating that tension on my stomach muscles, I guess to kind of substitute. and see if that could hold off my arm tics long enough to the point when the tattoo artist had to reload on ink or reposition, at which time I would let out my arm tics. But, I mean, not easy, and I know I'm forgetting certain details about this. And you might ask, well, why didn't you just go ahead and tell the tattoo artist and let him know what the deal was, that you have Tourette syndrome? And this was back when I was still ashamed and embarrassed and didn't have it in me to talk about TS openly. So what about y'all? Do any of you have tattoos that you had to fight your tics to get? And I know this is a really random kind of select question, I think, but it just occurred to me because I didn't say anything when Adrienne brought it up. Send me an email, tourettespodcast@gmail.com. If you're not following on Twitter, @TourettesPod is the handle. And of course, there's the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook, run by Sophia, whom I thank every week. All right, that'll do it for this episode. We'll see you next week in Season 2, Episode 13. This is Ben.